Hello everyone, my name is Ann-Marie Einhaus. I'm an Associate Professor in Modern and Contemporary Literature at Northumbria University, Newcastle, where I teach and research early 20th century British literature, and that includes an interest in the magazine market and how interwar magazines in Britain engaged with foreign literature, languages and cultures following the First World War. My topic today is a remarkable woman who was a key part of ensuring that Time and Tide was an outward-looking periodical covering international and particularly European affairs. And that woman is Cicely Hamilton, featured in the beautiful Time and Tide centenary issue. International coverage was an important part of Time and Tide in every category, and that includes current affairs, of course, political and economic analysis, but also reviews of art, literature and music. In April 1931, Time and Tide, in fact, announced the incorporation of Norman Angel's journal Foreign Affairs as a special monthly supplement to Time and Tide. And this was a move that helped to cement its reputation as one of the principal periodicals to read for anyone who was interested in international developments. Now, Hamilton was a woman of many talents. She was a feminist, an actor, a playwright, a novelist, journalist, and also a prolific travel writer. She wrote prolifically, not just for Time and Tide, but she also wrote for the Yorkshire Post, the Evening Standard, the Daily Express, the New Generation, and the Daily Mail. And I think it's interesting that you can see her writing for a lot of quite conservative papers as well. Her life has been explored in a lot of fascinating detail by Liz Whitelaw in her fantastic biography of Hamilton. Hamilton's links to Time and Tide were very close, and she served on its board of directors from at least around about 1923 to the mid-1940s. Initially, she started off by reviewing books and plays for Time and Tide, but her intimate knowledge of Germany in particular, and also of France, found its way into the magazine's pages more and more frequently when the first interwar decade was drawing to a close. So she contributed regular articles about social, political and cultural developments in Germany, and increasingly Hamilton became one of the magazine's main international commentators. Time and Tide and Hamilton shared a vision of a peaceful Europe based on informed citizens whose attitude struck the right balance between international understanding and recognition of national interests. Much of her coverage of Germany in Time and Tide was then later revised for her book Modern Germanies as Seen by an Englishwoman, which was published in the second half of 1931 and of course reviewed favourably in Time and Tide. So Hamilton's international experience and also particularly her wartime service galvanised her European politics in the interwar period. When she was a teenager, Hamilton had attended boarding school in Germany. She was an army child, and she followed this up by regular travel abroad and war work in France and Belgium as well during the war. She was, as you might imagine, fluent in German and French, and Hamilton also spent time in the Rhineland after the armistice as part of the occupying Allied forces, so she was an administrator supporting the occupying British Army. Modern Germanies, her travel book, was the first of 9 travel books she published between 1931 and 1939, covering initially Germany and then Italy, France, Russia, Austria, Ireland, Scotland, England and Sweden. Hamilton's image building as an expert on Germany in the pages of Time and Tide centered not least on her language skills. So in her books and articles, she placed great emphasis on her ability to speak and read German. And she frequently refers in her articles and also in her book to conversations with both friends and also chance acquaintances. So she makes a lot of the fact that she can just strike up a conversation with a waiter or someone she meets in a museum or a theatre. Hamilton's attitude towards internationalism, as I've hinted already, was quite complex. On the one hand, she had a really lively interest in other cultures and she wanted to promote transnational understanding and, wanted for other British people and English people in particular to travel to these other places. But on the other hand, she believed in the importance of patriotism and national identity, and as the daughter of a military officer, she had, great esteem for the British Armed Forces as well. And she had a pretty sober, really quite pessimistic view of human nature as fundamentally flawed. She, in a way, believed that war was kind of an inevitable part of everyday life. Although Hamilton had quite a few doubts about the effectiveness of organizations such as the League of Nations, her journalism and her travel writing of the interwar years were nevertheless intended as a contribution to maintaining peace in Europe. Her contributions on Germany in Time and Tide were increasingly quite prolific. For example, in the summer of 1929, and this of course is when Germany is very much in the public eye because of the huge success of All Quiet on the Western Front, she published a whole series of articles covering Cologne and Berlin as well-known places, German day-tripping habits, and also the German youth movement. Hamilton's view of Germany at this point, which was shared with a lot of other people, was that it was a nation that had emerged from the barbarism and suffering of the war, purged and ready to set an example for the rest of the Western world in terms of rebuilding and refocusing. However, the Nazi election success in the parliamentary elections of September 1930 then prompted Hamilton to very much qualify her hopeful appraisal of Germany's future. In the week following the National Socialist entry into the Reichstag as the second strongest party, Time and Tide published Hamilton's response to the election under the title Revolt Against Internationalism, German Variety. And this, to my mind, hugely important article is included in the wonderful Time and Tide centenary issue for you to read. In this article, Hamilton looked back at an encounter she had had earlier the same year with a Nazi contingent pamphleteering among some holiday crowds near Berlin. And the article recognized really the dangerous potential of harnessing youth for political purposes. Hamilton had noticed, in her words, that the boy element predominated among the Nazi pamphleteers she saw out campaigning. And although she felt that the individual young men she spoke to and she saw seemed, in her words, a good type of lad, she pointed out the really acute danger of a large organization of the very young, and I quote again, asking for an outlet for its energies and finding it, unfortunately, in a military political atmosphere. Hamilton wasn't really overly alarmist in her appraisal of Germany and the Nazis at this point, and at least temporarily she was also able to reassure herself that all Germans weren't likely to succumb to the attraction of Nazi militarism by reminding herself of the spirit of All Quiet on the Western Front, which she'd read and loved in German and also reviewed in the English translation. She didn't like the English translation. Yet she did see the very ready opening that the Nazis provided for agitation by harnessing youth in a time that was turbulent and full of change, especially considering widespread German grievances about the political and economic effects of the Treaty of Versailles. So Hamilton was skeptical of an internationalism that, in its very idealism, she felt failed to account for what she saw as humanity's inevitable instinct to band together. And she viewed Nazi agitation against Jews and non-Germans as a direct, and I quote, reaction as natural as inevitable against the idealistic sloppiness of post-war internationalism. And this sloppiness, I think she very much connects with ignoring of grievances and national concerns. Though Hamilton tried to keep an open mind, and understandably didn't foresee the full extent of Nazi atrocities to come at this point, she did recognize very clearly the Nazis' aggressive threat to Jews and also the fundamentally militant and anti-feminist policies of the National Socialists as, I quote, a fighting party and also essentially a man's organization. In her next article, on the Nazi disturbances following the opening of the Reichstag a month later, in October 1930, Hamilton already warned Time and Tide's readers a lot more forcefully against the increasing threat posed by Hitler's party. And to do this, she actually quotes at length from the National Socialist Party program, once again drawing on her knowledge of German to provide, in a way, a gloss, a translation, and a direct insight into the program that had brought the Nazis into the Reichstag. I think that Hamilton, even though we don't know for sure, was also likely the author of the portrait of Hitler in the regular Personalities and Powers column in Time and Tide on the 20th of September 1930, which articulated the danger posed by Hitler to the young German democracy. And in this piece, she paid close attention to Hitler's political strategy and noted that if it came to fruition, I quote here, he could destroy Parliament by the simple process of having it repudiate itself by the vote of its own henchmen, he, the leader, remaining outside until called in to assume the role of dictator-president. And as unfortunately we know, she had it kind of spot on. Such clear-sightedness is really significant. In a study of the weekly press and appeasement in Britain in the 1930s, historian Benny Morris has noted that although, and I quote him here, thousands of articles in Germany appeared in the weeklies in the course of the 30s, only 25 of those specifically set out to define, explain, or analyze Nazi ideology. And Hamilton is one of the ones who does that. Neither Time and Tide nor Hamilton were in any doubt as to Hitler's dangerous potential, although they were not yet, as I've said, alarmist in their coverage of Germany, and they did stick to promoting appeasement up until 1938. Looking at Hamilton's contributions in Time and Tide, I would say gives us an insight into the magazine's wider engagement with Europe in the interwar period, and its strategies for promoting a brand of internationalism that was aimed at producing well-informed and open-minded readers who were alert to national differences. Thank you very much for listening.